Hello, everyone. I'm Dan McClellan, e-learning coordinator for the BioNetwork BioEd Center, and welcome to today's webinar entitled Everything You Ever Wanted to Know About Biofuels in North Carolina, but Were Too Embarrassed to Ask. Our BioForum is scheduled to run from 10 a.m. until approximately 11:30 a.m. Eastern Time. If at any time during today's presentation you have a question, please feel free to type it in the chat box, which is located on the right side of the screen. Now, I'll be keeping a record of each question that is submitted, and we'll have a time at the end of the presentation to address all of your questions. And be sure to send chats to all participants. Now, we will be sharing a short video during today's webinar, and the video will appear in the media viewer panel on the right side of your screen, and that will pop up at the appropriate time. But know that you can use your mouse to drag and change the size of this video panel so that you can see the video better. You can also minimize other panels such as the chat and participants panels by clicking the collapse icon. We would like to know who we have in our audience today, and I've loaded a poll, and you should see it on the right side of your screen. So please go ahead and select the option that best describes you. Also, we want to have an accurate record of your participation in today's BioForum, so let us know if you're sharing a screen by typing the total number of participants at your location for question 2. Now, if you're the only person viewing at your screen, please just type a number 1. And while you're doing that, I encourage you to register for our June BioForum entitled The New Graduate's Guide to Landing That Job. More information and registration is available online at ncbionetwork.org. Thank you very much. We are pleased to have you meeting with us. And at this time, I'll turn it over to our first panelist, Norman Smit.
Good morning, all. I hope you can all hear me. Welcome to you from the Biofuels Center in Oxford. And if anyone has any questions, if you'll type them into the chat box, and Andrew and I will get to them at the end. I'm going to be going through some of these slides quite quickly. So if there's something that kind of whizzes by and you had a thought about it, please just make a note, and we'll try and answer your questions as best as possible at the end. The Biofuels Center, a little bit of background information, is a private not-for-profit organization. We're permanently funded by the General Assembly, and it's our job to implement state policy to develop a biofuels industry sector in North Carolina. We're based on North Carolina's Biofuels campus. It's a 426-acre site that we share in partnership with the North Carolina Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services. And this is an exciting venture because it's not every day that a state gets the opportunity to create a new sector. The North Carolina has lost a lot of jobs in the textiles, furniture, tobacco industries, and biofuels are a new venture that will be good for North Carolina's agricultural sector, for the economy, and for the environment. But perhaps more importantly are some of the strategic components or concerns about liquid transportation fuels. The planet is addicted to oil. There are no alternatives at a large scale to be able to replace oil at this time for our transportation needs. So the development of an industry sector that at least goes a significant way towards being able to reduce our dependence on oil is a key element to why the Biofuels Center exists and why there is a great need for the development of a biofuels industry sector. So let's have a look at some of the numbers. The United States uses 140 billion gallons of gasoline a year, 45 billion gallons of diesel a year. Note that's a B, not an M. And 60% of all petroleum products are imported from other countries. This costs a significant amount of money for the United States in terms of foreign reserves and foreign capital to be able to finance and pay for these massive imports of petroleum. The United States consumers use 24% of the world's oil. We produce 10%. So that the knee-jerk response has often been, drill, baby, drill. And at the Sustainable Energy Conference that happened last month, Bob Graham, who was the co-chair for the Federal Commission into the Deepwater Horizon oil spill, had some really interesting statistics and information about the state of the United States oil industry. And he actually said that if you were to use every single barrel of oil that can be obtained in the United States, and he was talking about oil, shale oil, and offshore oil, including that, all of that oil would be used by 2031, and he made the point that clearly this is unsustainable. Biofuels can be sustainable if it's done smartly, and so let's have a look at a quick mnemonic about biofuels. And during the course of the presentation, when you think about some of the feedstock issues and some of the production issues, these 4 points are going to come up over and over and over again. And some of what the Biofuel Center is involved in is solving some of these issues in partnership with others. So it's complicated. It's a technology. It springs from social need. We've talked about the strategic need. We haven't talked about the ecological and environmental as well. It's biomass-based. You can't have biofuels without biomass, and that point is going to be made. Biomass is critical, critical, critical. If you think about real estate, where it's location, 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 well, biofuels, biomass, biomass, biomass. And large scale, 140 billion gallons of fuel nationally. We've got to be able to make a dent in that. So it's complicated. So what we're doing is we're replacing both chemical compounds, the stuff that we use for fuel in our internal combustion engines, as well as a multi-billion-dollar global commodity. And when you've had 100 years to be able to establish an industry sector, and someone comes along and says, we're going to replace 10% of your market share, that's pretty significant, both from the point of view of competition, as well as from the point of view of establishing yourself as a new industry. It's a technology. These things don't happen overnight, and you can't just simply leave technologies to chance. You've got to be able to connect a lot of dots to be able to make progress. And for those of you who may be as old as I am, when I started out as a journalist in 1982, I worked on a typewriter. If you start thinking about where we are today in terms of communications and technology, this webinar, for example, it didn't get here overnight, being able to develop technologies. And there were failures along the way. There are going to be failures along the way as we develop the biofuels industry as well, but we will make progress. And a lot of the technologies currently exist, and we just have to be able to connect them in smart ways so that we can make it viable and profitable for landowners, producers, and the consumer. It springs from a social need. We looked at the strategic, some of the strategic issues around where we're importing our oil from. But if you start thinking about peak oil, Saudi Arabia, which is the most oil-rich country in the world, has begun diversifying its economy for a post-oil world. And on the demand side, you have 2 billion people in China and India who are switching from bicycles to cars. Those cars are going to need fuel. There's going to be increased demand for oil. It's a commodity that gets sold on the NYMEX exchange, and the price of a barrel of oil won't come down. Biomass. The biomass accounts for 80% of the cost of biofuels, so a percentage change in the acquisition of biomass for a biofuels producer has a huge impact on the finished cost of a gallon of biofuels. So that's the first part of this. The second part of this is that the land and the economic opportunity around growing biomass will become a strategic resource for states and countries as demand goes up. So bear that in mind when we start thinking about policy around biomass. It's a large-scale endeavor. If you think you've got lots of something, you don't have anywhere near enough. And this is one of the things that comes up over and over again when you read news reports about waste watermelons rotting in the fields. When you look at the size of that tanker over there, that's what we're trying to begin emulating in terms of making a dent on total demand and consumer demand at the pump. So one of the things that societies are going to have to start grappling with are things like fuel conservation and efficiencies, flex fuel hybrid vehicles, public transportation, telecommuting, that kind of thing. And so the issues around transportation and cost are going to become increasingly a part of public debate. So to create this industry sector, bear those 4 points that I just went through over there, 4 or 5 points in mind as we proceed with this. You have to create a sector. You can't just create the biofuels. So you have to be able to connect the dots between the landowner who's growing biomass, the logistics around harvesting and transportation, the technology that's going to be used to produce a biofuel, getting it from the biofuels production facility to the consumer, and then that there may be workforce issues, policy issues, and then the consumer has to trust the fuel that they're using in their vehicles. So to accomplish this, let's have a look at what we looked at national demand. North Carolina uses about 5.5 billion gallons of fuel a year. Our strategic plan calls for us to be able to replace 10% of that. North Carolina is also growing as a state, so we anticipate that to be able to reach our goal of 10%, we're looking at about 600 million gallons of biofuels a year. To be able to do that, the Biofuel Center is implementing North Carolina's strategic plan. There are 9 strategies over there. They're fairly straightforward. The strategic plan can be downloaded from the homepage of the Biofuel Center's website. And as I mentioned before, this is going to require partnerships with government, with industry, with research, with farmers, with the extension service, with the forestry sector, and with new technologies, with the petroleum marketers, and with consumers and the general public. For biofuels to be implemented statewide as a large-scale industry sector, we are going to have to meet the triple bottom line. So biofuels can't be produced if they're not profitable. The landowner's got to make some money out of this. The producer has to be able to make money out of this, and it's got to be cost competitive for the consumer. Otherwise, there's going to be resistance to purchasing it at the pump. It has to be sustainable from the point of view of not diminishing our land, water quality, or our air quality. And there needs to be social equity. We believe that all of these things, these issues can be addressed as we develop this new industry sector. And we think there's going to be a real opportunity for people across the board as this starts becoming real. Some terminology. In many instances, people think about, when they hear biofuels, they're thinking about either bioenergy or biopower. There is a real distinction. When we're talking about biofuels, we're talking about liquid transportation fuels. Quite often, biopower and bioenergy are conflated, but really bioenergy is the overall or overarching term for both biopower, renewable power, and renewable fuels. The driver on the national level from a policy point of view is the Renewable Fuel Standard, which was part of the Energy Independence and Security Act of 2007. You can see that corn ethanol tops out over here at about 15 billion gallons of fuel a year. The goal is to reach 36 billion gallons of renewable fuels by 2022. Obviously, the difference between 15 billion gallons and 36 to 40 billion gallons isn't going to be accomplished with corn. So, and that's true for where we are in North Carolina as well. The difference has to be made out of cellulosic materials. This is the situation as we currently in the United States. The 11 billion gallons of biofuels that are being made is mainly corn ethanol. You can see where the majority of the facilities are located. They're surrounded by a sea of corn. And that is going to be equally true in North Carolina. The only difference is that we're not going to be surrounded by a sea of corn. We're going to be surrounded by a sea of cellulosic biomass. But 11 billion gallons is a significant quantity of biofuels. Once again, just a reminder of scale. One of those 65 million gallon a year corn ethanol facilities uses about 2 unit trains of corn a week. That's 200 carriage loads of corn a week. If we were to convert that facility into something like energy grasses, we'd be using about 15 football fields of bales of switchgrass a day. And remember, these facilities run 365 days a year. And so if we harvest an energy grass at the end of the season, we have to solve some of the logistics and storage issues around what do we do for the rest of the year. And so those are some of the questions that the Biofuel Center is currently addressing in its agronomic research. Well, there is a misconception that biofuels are just ethanol and biodiesel. There are a whole range of biofuels that aren't just ethanol and biodiesel. Biogasoline, biojet fuel, Fischer-Tropsch diesel. There's a range of biofuels that are not just produced with transesterification. So let's talk about some of those biofuels and some of those processes. To be able to make any of these fuels, you have to have these 4 components: land, a feedstock, a process technology, and then an output or a product. So that's the land that's available currently, and that's not going to change. There are a range of feedstocks, and the ones that we're looking at in North Carolina are primarily wood and energy grasses. We are also currently underway at looking at municipal solid waste, but we just don't know enough at this point about that to be able to quantify how much there is and what the issues are around locating it and converting it into biofuels. So let's start off by just primarily thinking in North Carolina about woody biomass and energy grasses. There are a range of process technologies, and in some instances the process technology is very narrowly specific to the feedstock. And then there are a whole range of products or commodities that come out of this process. So first generation, that's what you're looking at in the Midwest. You're looking at row crop land, growing corn. The starch in the corn is fermented, and you end up with ethanol. And the corn that's currently grown is primarily grown for animal feed. So the fiber, the oil, and the protein that remains, the distillers' dry grains and solubles, is a co-product of that. And one of those 65 million gallon a year corn ethanol facilities will produce about 18,000 bushels of distillers' dried grains a day. And that will go to the animal feed industry as a co-product, as a high protein co-product for animal feed. First generation biodiesel, and I'm sure Andy will talk about this a little bit more in his presentation, uses primarily oil crops and animal fats and waste oils using transesterification and producing biodiesel. When you start looking at second generation ethanol, and here we're talking about cellulosic ethanol, where you're converting woody biomass and energy grasses, you're pre-treating it to be able to decouple the lignin, and you're ending up with, you ferment the sugars that remain, and you end up with ethanol. There's a company at the Biofuels Accelerator in Oxford that is using a chemical route, this is not a biochemical route, and what they're doing is they're using hydrochloric acid to be able to break down the biomass. They then recover the hydrochloric acid, and it leaves the sugars, which can be fermented, and lignin, which can be used as a co-product as well as a fiber. So we start looking at things like biomass-derived fibers, things like carbon fiber replacements, and that type of thing. The other route is called the thermochemical route, and what happens here is you take biomass, you think about it as a hydrocarbon, you gasify it, you catalyze out the gases, and you end up with another hydrocarbon, which is biogasoline or Fischer-Tropsch diesel or fuel alcohols. And this process is not a new process. It was used by the Nazis in World War II. South Africa used it at a very large scale, converting coal and natural gas during apartheid and sanctions, and making gasoline and diesel as well. The difficulty is that is literally scaling it down to be small enough to be able to produce Fischer-Tropsch diesel or biogasoline. But there are some very promising technologies around at this time which are showing that this can be done. And in fact, a grant that the Biofuels Center helped fund to a company which was also funded through a DOE grant resulted in 1,000 hours continuous on their process, which is a major milestone. And from that, they've been able to derive real numbers around the cost of Fischer-Tropsch conversion of biomass into advanced biofuels. Feedstock, feedstock, feedstock. Remember that? 80% of the cost. So when you start looking at the biofuels value chain, you've got to be able to get the feedstock out of the ground, harvested, transported to the biorefinery where it's processed and converted, transported to the pump, which is where the end user can obtain it. And there are issues that we have to solve everywhere along the value chain, as well as opportunities. Wherever there's an issue, there's an opportunity for money to be made. And connecting the dots along the value chain is part of what the Biofuels Center is currently actively doing. And to be able to get to a point where the end user is able to use biofuels at scale is going to require that feedstocks are available 365 days a year at low cost to the producer to be able to make low-cost fuels that are cost competitive with oil. So when you start looking at cellulosic ethanol, and we believe that North Carolina's key opportunities around biomass for the state is in energy grasses and wood. When you look at row crop land, if a farmer is able to plant a high-value crop like tobacco, tomatoes, vegetables, fruits, cotton, there is absolutely no incentive whatsoever for them to go and plant a cheap, low-cost feedstock. They can make more money growing the high-value commodity. And so most of the work that we've done hasn't been in areas that impact food production. So bear that in mind when you start thinking about food versus fuel, and certainly that isn't going to be an issue here in North Carolina. The crops that can be planted that will compete with food will simply price themselves out of the market. So one of the areas that we have looked at are the Hog Lagoon spray fields in eastern North Carolina. One of the big advantages are that they're all close, they're concentrated. So when you start thinking about transportation logistics in that area, if you were to plonk something down in the middle of that three-county zone, production facility, transportation isn't going to be over large distances, which reduces the cost of the biomass. So why spray fields? One, they're irrigated. Two, Spray fields are a cost of doing business for the hog industry. The hog industry produces hog manure, which goes into hog lagoons, and the way in which that is ameliorated is the wastewater from those hog lagoons is sprayed on spray fields. The grasses take it up, primarily coastal Bermuda, and produces 3 ton an acre. And for the most part, that coastal Bermuda can't really be resold. It's such a low value product that there isn't really a market for that coastal Bermuda. They're growing around 3 tons an acre. We're proposing that instead of growing 3 tons an acre of coastal Bermuda, we grow miscanthus or some of the other energy grasses like Arundinonax, which can produce 20 to 30 tons an acre, which then means that instead of going from a low-value waste product, we end up with a low-cost, high-value source of biomass. So what I've kind of tried to demonstrate to you is that to be able to get a low-cost fuel for the consumer, the landowner's got to make some money, but the landowner has to be able to sell a low-cost or cheap feedstock to the producer, who will be buying large quantities of this to be able to convert this into biofuels to be cost competitive at the pump for the consumer. So those are some of that's not a straightforward equation, and that's been one of the difficulties in solving this value chain issue. And the biodiesel industry has been struggling with this for the past few years. When they started out, soybean oil was something of a waste product because the protein was, the meal was the highest value part of that, and that was going to the animal feed industry, and the oil was left over. Biodiesel was then being produced from that oil, and when it was realized that there was real value for human consumption of that oil, then that feedstock became expensive, and it became impossible to produce $4 a gallon biodiesel from $9 a gallon soybean oil. And so these are some of the issues that have to be solved to be able to produce low-cost biofuels from low-cost feedstocks, and everybody still make money out of it. So that was energy grasses. Let's take a look at woody biomass, which is the other large possibility around as a feedstock for North Carolina. There are nearly 18 million acres of forest land in North Carolina. Most of this is in private landowners' hands. We're not talking about cutting down the Blue Ridge Parkway here. Landowners who have acreages of trees have a dilemma. North Carolina has some of the lowest stump prices in the United States, in the order of around $2.50 a stump. So, what's the incentive to have land tied up for 25 years in wood? And so biofuels, woody biomass for biofuels presents a real opportunity for the landowner. We don't want to see forests being cut down willy-nilly, and so the issue of sustainability is a real question. And it's been one of the things that the Biofuel Center has been actively engaged in assessing. And to give you some idea of sustainability around woody biomass supply, this slide shows you what the pulp and paper industry has been doing to manage woody biomass supply for pretty much the last century. And when you have a look at some of the greenwood tonnages a day at some of the pulp and paper mills, the one right at the top, 12,000 green tons a day, sustainably harvested and regrown. That's a fairly significant tonnage. What it does is, in the area around those paper mills, the landowner instantly replants the moment something is cut down, the moment forest land is cut down, because they know that they have a market to resell. And so the woody biomass supply is replenished because there's money to be made. one of the things that we've also been looking at is when you start looking at the distance from around a biofuels production facility. A lot of the forest land in North Carolina, because there are relatively few markets to sell woody biomass, a lot of the woody biomass and forest land around in North Carolina is not managed for maximum tonnages per acre. In some instances, it's managed for board timber, or dimensional lumber, where forest land is planted with large gaps between trees. But if you start thinking about if there's real value in high tonnages, the range around a facility is dramatically reduced by increasing the tonnages and yields of woody biomass around a facility. When you think about the benefits to North Carolina that a biofuel sector will bring to North Carolina, 600 million gallons means the following: about $1.5 billion that'll stay in circulation in the economy, more than 3,000 jobs. Those are direct jobs. $1 billion in annual direct revenues, wages, 130 million, 2,500 jobs created during the construction of the facilities. And what needs to be borne in mind is that these facilities will be built in rural areas. They won't be built in the urban areas of North Carolina. One of the things that we did is we took a look at the acreages that will be required to be able to reach 600 million gallons of biofuels a year, and both in energy grasses and woody biomass. And based on the best information that we have at the moment, and this map will change in future as biomass surveys come in and are refined. But this map presents an overview with the best knowledge that we have and the best information that we have currently of North Carolina's future biofuels industry landscape. So, and you can see that the woody biomass and energy grasses are going to be the primary drivers to be able to reach that 600 million gallon a year mark. So you've gone and solved the issues around raising the capital, building your 250 million gallon a year biorefinery, persuading landowners to sell you to grow biomass and sell you their biomass. You've solved all of the logistical issues around storage, and you're producing biofuels, and now what? So what's happened in Brazil, for example, which is furthest along in the biofuels production infrastructure development as an industry. What's happening in Brazil is that they're looking at biofuels not from a production point of view, but from a refining point of view. And in the same way as the petroleum industry doesn't just make fuel, they make a whole lot of other products as well. The value is thinking not just about maximizing fuel production, but in terms of producing high-value commodities along with fuel. And this facility has come online in Brazil, cost $278 million, and they're making bioplastics out of ethanol, and the process is ethanol to ethylene, ethylene to polyethylene, and they're doing this as a hedge, because when you're producing more than just one product, if you're not just producing fuel, you have real options when commodity prices rise and fall. You can shift your process from one commodity to another and remain cost competitive and financially viable. And this is one of the areas that the Biofuel Center is beginning to investigate in terms of both an industry sector as well as next steps. So we talked about some of the products that the petroleum industry makes. They don't just make fuel. There are just a few, and those are some of the opportunities in the future as we begin shifting from a petroleum or an oil-based industry to a biomass-based industry. So it doesn't help that we persuade landowners to grow biomass. We manage to attract the investment, the millions of dollars of investment to produce these biofuels, unless the consumer is satisfied that it isn't going to negatively impact their vehicle, and unless they actually want to use these biofuels, there is going to be a breakdown in the value chain. And some of the most common questions that we hear at the Biofuel Center are: what are biofuels? Can my car use biofuels? What's a flex fuel vehicle? And am I really already using biofuels now? What most people don't realize is that in the fuel that's being used or being sold in North Carolina, probably around 70% of the fuel sold in North Carolina already contains a percentage of ethanol, if not 10%. So right now, when you're driving around, you're already using biofuels blends. So to be able to address these questions, the Biofuel Center has a public education campaign where we reach out, and that's to be able to foster consumer understanding and acceptance of biofuels, so that there is fact-based information out there for consumers to understand the nature of the fuels that they're using. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to switch from PowerPoint slides to some web-based information, and just give me a sec. So last year, the Biofuel Center obtained some funding from the Department of Energy that came to us via the State Energy Office, and we launched ncbiofuels.net. And many of you may be familiar with the Biofuel Center's website. Well, ncbiofuels.net was created to be able to address questions by the general public and consumers, and to be able to answer some of those questions. The funding that we received was for a project called Advancing Public Education, and it was launched at State Fair last year. We gave people the opportunity to be able to shoot a video of themselves speaking about why they support North Carolina biofuels. And we ended up with, I don't know, let's see, 550 or so, 560 videos in the 10-day period at State Fair. And the bulk of those videos revolved around three key themes: the environment, strategic security, and North Carolina's economy. And if you go to ncbiofuels.net, there are keywords. You can do a keyword search around some of those, and they'll pull them up, and you can play them on your browser. This is an example of one of the videos, and I'm not sure if this can be, do I need to hand back the ball for you to be able to play this video?
Yes, Norman, if you would just take us back to the main event screen, and I'll be glad to load that video for you.
Alrighty, there you go.
Thanks, sir. So we're going to be looking at a very quick video it's streaming from YouTube, but in just a second you will see a media viewer panel on your screen, and you will be able to control the video. And if for some reason you're unable to see it, I'll provide the link to the video in the chat box.
Alternatively, you can go to ncbiofuels.net and type in babies.
Okay, Norman, I think most folks have had a chance to watch the video, so if you want to carry on, please do so.
Alrighty, you're going to have to hand back the ball to me, Dan.
Certainly, my apologies.
All right, so there are from the videos that the general public came and volunteered to do, we produced 15 television ads that were played at the beginning of the year to raise awareness about biofuels in North Carolina and to be able to begin attracting people to ncbiofuels.net and make them aware of where they can go and find information about where to locate biofuels facilities. There's a map on the Fuel Finder map, and there are a range of categories where you can type in a search and look for E85 or co-op biodiesel or biodiesel distributors in the state or government use. And because what we found was that there were a number of filling stations that we weren't aware of. Part of what we did is we launched a whole range of social media outlets to be able to enable the community, the North Carolina community, to be able to share information and communicate with us. So we launched a Facebook page. This is the ncbiofuels.net Facebook community. When we started this at the beginning of the year, there were 137 people. There are now over 2,000. The fan base or the people that are participating over here, this is growing steadily, and it not only enables us to be able to have a conversation with people, but it enables people to share their what they know about biofuels with us and with each other. So this is a valuable way in which we can have a conversation about biofuels in North Carolina. We launched a Twitter feed for NC Biofuels, and so feel free to go and join that. It's one of the ways in which we're able to communicate with people, and in the coming months, we are going to be involving the filling station owners to a greater degree. And so, if they, for example, have a good price on fuel, we'll be able to tweet it through ncbiofuels.net. The Biofuel Center has its own Twitter feed as well. This is targeted primarily to industry and to the local community from the point of view of industry development. So there will be information shared via our Twitter feed on grants, on research, and obviously on industry development. The Biofuel Center also launched the Biofuels Wiki, and this, from the point of view of educators, this is a useful site. It has over 1,000 pages. It is an open platform. We moderate the site, but think about it as a platform for biofuels education in the classroom, both from the point of view of sourcing information as well as from the point of view of participation by community college groups and others to be able to share information and develop information. A key element to this is that we now have a LinkedIn plugin on this. So, for example, if a person were to edit a page, the site can be used for professional networking and to be able to demonstrate that you're a subject matter expert. And what I'm doing at the moment, for example, is I'm editing that, and I've put double brackets around the word hydrocarbons, and if the word hydrocarbons exists in the Biofuels Wiki as a term or a page, as you see there, it now is in orange, that page will connect automatically to the word hydrocarbons. And you can then go and share an update that you've done with all of your network, professional network on LinkedIn. So, for example, I've just gone and edited the page for diesel, the diesel standard, biodiesel standard, and an update has been made to the ASTM standard on the biofuels wiki, and you can post it to groups. I'm not going to do that right now. I'm going to share it with all of my contacts. And what will happen now is on LinkedIn, this page that you're seeing right in front of you now will be shared with all of my contacts on LinkedIn. And what it does is it means that if you're from a professional networking point of view, that page will start showing up in Google and demonstrating that you're a subject matter expert on a topic, particularly if you have a whole range of edits and pages that you've gone either created or edited and then posted to LinkedIn. And then lastly, this is the Biofuel Center's new website that's going to be launched very soon. We have a Twitter feed on the home. This is our Twitter feed on our home page. You can sign up for the newsletter. And then obviously there's a whole range of other information, resources and white papers, FAQs, and media as well, podcasts that are available on the Biofuels Center website. And that's a quick overview of some of the resources that are available on the Biofuels, that the Biofuels Center has created on the World Wide Web and made available. And that's it for me. If there are any questions, I'll be happy to try and answer them at the end along with Andrew.
Thank you very much, Norman. At this time, we're going to turn it over to our second panelist, Andrew. Andrew, I'm passing the ball to you.
Hi, good morning, everybody. Norman, thanks. That was a great overview. That really was a good job of explaining kind of the big picture of biofuels in the state of North Carolina. What I'm going to talk about now is some of the efforts on a significantly smaller scale that we try to work with at Central Carolina Community College. We are just a small community college, and while we can't really individually impact those large-scale changes that need to happen for the state, what we try and do is support the industry, and then also for our students provide examples of smaller-scale projects that they can themselves take into industry and help grow that industry. So we have been doing this biofuels education since about 2005. We started as a continuing education class, just a single class by itself. Really just was a way for folks to get together and discuss biofuels, small-scale biodiesel, mostly at that point. But really, this back in 2005, 2004, there was very little going on at all in biofuels in the state, and so this served as a good meeting place for folks to get together and discuss this. And out of the college has come a couple really fun projects, and that's what I'm going to mostly talk about today. So what we try and look at, Norman had a slide before on his presentation that showed kind of the full cycle of the biofuels process, and it showed the feedstock component, the processing component, and then the end user. And really what we do at the college here is we try and make our biofuels experience for our students as interdisciplinary as possible because there are a lot of aspects to training for biofuels. And so what we do is mostly focus on the production piece. So we are in the chemical processing, the industrial systems type training. That is really where most of our biofuels program efforts in training are. Now we also have a farming program here at the college, and we also have some other programs that maybe on the surface don't seem like they fit quite right with biofuels education, such as the Natural Chef program, but I'll show you in a couple slides here how they do dovetail in. So what we mostly do, well, actually, let me say that all of our programs, the Sustainable Farming Program, which we have a 2-acre organic farm here on campus, plus we have another about 3 acres of oilseed crop farm that our sustainable farming students are right now managing. So we have about 5 acres total of sustainable farm here just on our satellite campus in Pittsboro. That Sustainable Farming Program, our Biofuels Program, our Natural Chef Program, and then also our Renewable Energy Program are all housed in this facility. It's our Sustainable Technology Building. If you look here, these are solar thermal collectors, so they're taking radiation or irradiance from the sun and turning that into basically hot water for the flooring in our building and also for hand washing. And then these, what you're looking at down here, are 5 classrooms. This is a 5-classroom, 3 laboratory building, and then over here we have a commercial kitchen, which is where our culinary program is located. Right here, this red type rock, this crushed rock, is actually on-site wastewater treatment. So we actually treat our black water, not just our gray water. And then also you may notice that we have our green roof here. So that helps with heating and cooling costs due to the nice heat sink in the roof there. So this is our facility. We started working in this building just last year, but we have really found a nice home here in this building. So part of what we do is analytical training for our biofuel students. So now I'm going to talk about really focusing in on what skills we try and train for in our biofuels program. One of the big components is analytical training. So we're looking at what skills do people need to be able to be technicians at a processing plant. So there are a couple big categories of skills. One would be the actual processing of the fuel. Another would be the analytical side, so the laboratory. How do we know that the fuel that we're out there in the plant making is quality, is on spec, is available, is readily available to be sold? And that's through analytical analysis. And so what we have here, what you're looking at, is equipment that is designed specifically to do testing in compliance with ASTM. Most of this is for ASTM D6751, which is for biodiesel. We also have some for bioethanol. We've used this lab not only for training of our students in a classroom setting, but we've actually also been able to, we've been very fortunate to be able to use this equipment to actually do testing for industry. So we've tested for folks as far away as Maine. Really, anyone who approaches us and needs analytical testing, we try and work it into our student cycles so that we can allow our students to test this. The benefit is that we get our students to have hands-on experience with testing for real situations and real fuel, and we're able to provide folks who may not be able to afford testing, such as farmers, or we can do day-to-day processing testing occasionally for even larger producers who maybe want to see to help calibrate and get some idea of how accurate their equipment's working. So we participate in all of the industry round robins, and so our lab is standardized, it's calibrated, and it's actually it works quite well. This is one of the components, and the other is our fuel production. So we have a production facility here in that new Sustainable Technology Building. It's an explosion-proof room rated to process fuel. It is designed with production of multi-feedstock, multi-processing of biodiesel and ethanol in mind. So what that basically means is we have a bunch of tanks, a bunch of pumps, piping systems, air systems, boilers, chillers, basic components that we can construct to be able to process not just a single feedstock in a single proprietary processing manner. What we really have is equipment to train the fundamentals of chemical processing, because at the end of the day, what we're really doing here is we're taking a substance, a chemical, and chemically processing it into another chemical. And so what we're doing is showing our students and demonstrating and having our students create these systems that they can learn how to not just understand some person's proprietary system, but actually the fundamentals of how to fix pumps, how to how to align motors, all of these things that they're really going to need to know in the day-to-day. So we feel like that's a very good experience for our students to be able to actually, get the hands-on processing. What this really looks like, when we first went about this in 2006, developing this biofuels program, we were really looking at it from a biofuels industry-centric view, which, to be completely frank, was, in hindsight, we probably would not have gone about this in the same manner if we were going to develop this again today. So I know that I saw that quite a few people in this call are from community colleges, and the message that I've been trying to get out to community colleges is we have fantastic facilities. We have an unbelievable biofuels training program. Unfortunately, what we don't have are a huge number of processing facilities close by. And so what we experience is low enrollment occasionally, especially when fuel prices drop. We're very susceptible to the market and the people's perceptions of biofuels. So honestly, if we had to do it again, I think what we would do is roll it into something like an industrial systems program, because again, if you think about what we train at the community college in our industrial systems programs, we're talking about pumps and pipings and facilities maintenance and plant operations, all of these things that really apply to biofuels, but in a larger scale picture. And so it's a much easier pathway from maybe what we already do at our community college. I believe there's right about almost 35 to 40 colleges in North Carolina, community colleges in North Carolina, that currently offer industrial systems as a program at their college. And so instead of all these colleges going back and trying to reinvent maybe a biofuel specific program, what I've encouraged people to do is to leverage what they have in their industrial systems and incorporate biofuels into that. And that's ultimately what we did. If you look at our schedule of courses that we offer, we really do have it's a industrial systems program that is specific to the biofuels industry. So that's just kind of a point that I like to make when we're doing this. So here I'm going to show, this is a project that our students have worked on. So this, again, we're at a scale where the numbers that Norman talked about are quite mind-boggling. The 5.5 billion gallons a year just for North Carolina fuel needs it's a staggering number. So to try and not get our students kind of overwhelmed by that and discouraged by that, what we've tried to do is make some projects here on campus that are much more achievable on a local level so that our students can see that this is possible. So even if we're not producing gobs and gobs of fuel, what we're able to demonstrate here in student-driven projects is that this is possible, period. And now if it's possible on a small scale, that's a good thing, and we can start to build up on that. And so what I'm going to do is take you through this process that we're working on right now to incorporate a project that really brings in all of our programs. So we'll start here. So like I said before, we have a 3-acre oilseed crop farm. We rotate that between sunflower, canola, and then soybeans on a multi-year rotation. We also use cover crop. So we're pulling in our sustainable farming students to do what they do. They know how to grow crops in a sustainable manner. And now growing a biofuels feedstock on a small scale at our college is just leveraging the knowledge that they know. And so now they're feeling vested, even though they maybe didn't come to this college to learn about biofuels, they're planting biofuels crops. And so now we have farming students who are feeling engaged and feeling like they have a connection to the biofuels industry. So they grow our crops here, and then if we come down, the next process is we will crush these seeds from in this case, the sunflower, and we'll get 2 products. The first is oil on the left there, and then right here is the meal. So this is the solids when we crush those seeds, which we have a seed press that actually can extract the oil from the seeds. We're left over with what would be called meal, which is chicken food. And from our first slide you saw there, we have about 40 chickens here on campus. And so the meal that's produced from those 3 acres is then fed to our chickens. So typical chicken food, animal food, this is the main ingredient. And so our chickens love it, and we're able to, again, have 0 waste there. So far we have no waste. Down here, this is where the culinary program comes in. So on campus here, we have the ability to actually create food-grade oil. So once the oil is pressed, we then take our 5-gallon buckets, 55-gallon drums, whatever they need, down to the culinary kitchen here, and they use it in their fryers. So they're able to fry up whatever delicious treats they have in store, and then once that oil is basically spent for food consumption, they send it back down to our biofuel students. At that point, our biofuel students then go through the processing of that oil into usable biodiesel. Again, we know for a fact that the fuel that we're making is high quality fuel because we also have the analytical capabilities here to do that testing. And then once we have that fuel, we are then able to make 2 products out of that. One is fuel for the tractor that goes back to grow the next year's oilseed crop, and the other is soap. So we can use that glycerin byproduct, this brownish layer at the bottom, and we can use that to make glycerin soap. So this is, all in all, relatively speaking, a 0 waste, completely student-driven, full cycle project that shows how biofuels can be achieved on a small scale and also just achieved by students and groups working together. So this is a project that we're very proud of. We think it makes a lot of sense. It's a great demonstration, and our students really, really enjoy it. One other thing, it's on a slightly larger scale that we've been able to do through great help from the Solar Center at NC State and through the Department of Transportation, is currently, and Piedmont Biofuels also, currently, if you were to drive through Pittsboro, actually just drive just north of Pittsboro on the 64 bypass that goes around our town, for 6 miles or so on both sides of the highway, we have canola growing. So it's a project that NC State, the Solar Center, and the DOT have been working on to look at the viability of growing oilseed crops on the side of the road. And so now we have that oilseed, the canola seed, that some of which will be diverted to the college, which then we will be able to give our students the opportunity to crush that oil, turn that oil into fuel, and then return that fuel back to the DOT, which will then be used in their fleet. So it's a great project for our students. This is the kind of theme. We're trying to get our students engaged, trained, and feeling like that even though these numbers are sometimes mind-boggling, that each gallon counts, and that's kind of the way that we've gone about it. So really that was the basis of my presentation. I just wanted to give you a couple examples of what we do here, and really at this point I'd be happy to open it up for questions for Norman or I.
Thanks, Andrew. We do have several questions that we want to address, but if you have additional questions, please go ahead and submit those through the chat box because we have plenty of time to address all of your questions. So in just a moment, I'm going to put the list of questions on the screen so we can see those, and we'll just tackle them one by one. All right, so the first question. I think this one is geared for Norman, but either.
The issue of oil, I think, is there are a couple of issues here. The first is that the question of sustainability doesn't go away. The second thing is in the same way as creating a biofuels industry sector takes time, finding oil and drilling for it takes time too. So if you were to start drilling right now, you're probably not going to see that oil being available for a number of years. The third point is that that oil is a commodity. So the fact that it might be drilled here doesn't necessarily mean that it'll be sold here. If an oil company can get more by selling it in China, they will. So the issue of oil being a commodity shouldn't be discounted. And lastly, the question of this being a fossil fuel needs to be considered as well. So the price of climate change isn't considered. And then the other part of this is when you start factoring in the money that gets put into unsustainable opportunities could be better spent on creating sustainable opportunities. And so the oil that's drilled for in Alaska doesn't benefit North Carolina's economy, and it certainly doesn't assist us in reducing our dependence, the state's dependence on imports either. So this is not a straightforward question, and there is a great deal of wisdom to be able to create a local sector.
Thanks, Norman. The second question, I believe I can answer this one. Will the presentation be available to review? Certainly, yes, it will be. We have been recording today's presentation, and you can find out about it and check it out on demand at any time at ncbionetwork.org. And you're going to receive a thank you email tomorrow, and I'll include the link in that email. All right, we'll take question number 3.
The Clean Burn Fuels facility in Hope County is a corn ethanol facility. When that facility was built and the company ran the numbers, it seemed to them to make sense to that at the current price of corn, which was several years ago, and the current prices of ethanol several years ago, and the value of the co-products to the hog and poultry industry in North Carolina, it seemed to make sense that they might be able to bring in corn from the Midwest and be able to sell the co-products at sufficient value to the hog and poultry industry, and at then current prices, ethanol prices, and fuel prices, they were likely to be cost competitive. What subsequently happened is that with the price of oil going up, the price of fertilizer, transportation, and corn has shot up significantly, and the price of ethanol hasn't increased at the same rate, and so they essentially ran into a cash flow issue. That doesn't necessarily mean that the facility still presents some real opportunities for the state of North Carolina. And one of the things that the Biofuel Center is doing is it's looking at ways in which local feedstocks can be sourced and made available to that facility other than corn to be able to get back up on its feet. It is, that's a significant investment, and it still creates some real opportunities for the state of North Carolina.
All right, number 4.
This is a question that I can't address easily. What I would suggest is the person that sent in this question contact me offline afterwards, and what I will do is I'll put them in touch with our Director of Forestry and our Sector Development people. The question is also complicated by it depends. It depends on the process, and it depends on whether or not we're talking biochemical, chemical, thermochemical. And for example, with a thermochemical process, depending on the way in which the gasification tweaked will determine whether or not you end up with fuel alcohols, biogasoline, or jet fuel. And by volume, you'll end up with, you can use a thermochemical process to end up with fuel alcohols, and you'll end up with a greater volume of fuel alcohols than you will of jet fuel. And the reason for that is jet fuel is a longer hydrocarbon than ethanol. And so the yield of fuel to a ton of woody biomass is not a straightforward one-to-one equation.
Okay. Number 5 is a question specifically about Johnston County.
The map that was put up showed some of the assessments around where we anticipate landowners are able to grow sources of biomass that can be used for biofuels production. I need to reiterate that where landowners have row crop land, they're going to grow table sweet potatoes, tobacco, food crops. That's what they can make the bulk of they can make more money growing that stuff than they will growing energy grasses or wood. That said, Johnston County does have a fairly significant hog industry, and there may be some opportunities around some of the spray fields in Johnston County as well. So that may be the best, the greatest possibility for Johnston County.
Okay, number 6.
What's the best biomass crop? It depends. Again, if you're in woodland, then the best biomass crop from a biofuels point of view that you can grow is wood. If you're somewhere else where a different kind of feedstock can be grown, then that's what you'll grow. At the end of the day, individual farmers will make decisions based on the type of land that they have, and also the kind of proximity that they're likely to have to a biofuels production facility. You heard Andrew mention small-scale biodiesel. There are places where small-scale farming around oilseed crops makes sense. This is not a one-to-one, once again, type of thing. And depending on the type of soil you have and the part of the state that you're in, will determine the type of crops that can be grown.
Okay, number 7.
This is another one of those how long is a piece of string types of questions. There are a whole range of factors here, and none of it is simple. If it depends on, by cheapest, it depends on the cost of your capital. It depends on the distance, that the logistics around the feedstocks to your facility. I mentioned the clean burn fuels facility earlier on. One of the difficulties that they had were transportation of corn from the Midwest to North Carolina. The cost of processing is 20% of the finished cost of the fuel, and so even if you have a 60 or 70% improvement over your production process, if the price of your feedstock goes up by 2 or 3%, you're going to end up with a more expensive fuel. So the primary costs around processing are the cost of capital, and that remains the biggest issue currently in terms of being able to launch production processes from pilot scale to commercial scale. When you go to the bank and you say to a bank, lend me $250 million to build a 60 million or 70 million gallon a year facility, they're going to turn around and say to you, where's this been done before? And if it hasn't been done anywhere before, which is currently the issue, then you know they're going to turn around and say, we're not going to risk, we're not going to leverage this kind of money and run this sort of risk for our shareholders. So cheap is not a straightforward question that can be easily answered. Having said that, one of the things that the Biofuels Center spent 2 years doing was it has developed very sophisticated financial modeling tools that enables us to sit down with landowners on the one hand, with producers on the other, and with retail distributors to be able to run the numbers through these modeling tools to be able to identify whether or not a process is likely to be viable, and to run scenarios on it as well. So we can assist companies in being able to identify whether or not a process that they have is likely to be viable at a particular cost.
Yeah, and Norman, I'll jump in there and agree with you on that. That I think it's a great point you made as far as how the two go hand in hand. So efficiency or appropriate technology of these processing methods really can depend heavily on what feedstock it is. And so even though it makes sense to folks that crops are regionally specific, but if the processes that we're using are best maximized being matched up with maybe a certain crop, that means that actually also the technology is almost as regionally specific as the crops being grown there. And so it really is a very, it's more of a finding the appropriate one for your area, both in crop and production, that really lead to the most sense in the cheapest or most efficient method for production. So yeah, I think that you're exactly right on that.
And one last comment. Part of the reason why I put those slides in about biorefining is because what producers are finding is that if when the price of oil drops because global demand might drop briefly, it may be enough to put them out of business. And so what they're doing is one of the reasons why companies are starting to look at biorefining as opposed to biofuels production is that, for example, in a thermochemical model, you may tweak your gasification process, and rather than producing fuel, you may up the output into waxes, and then from those paraffinic waxes, you can make a whole range of high-value commodities. That may not necessarily mean that the output is producing fuel, but what it does mean is that the facility may be financially viable while the price of oil is volatile around bioproducts that return a better yield on investment. And so you're starting to see this kind of biofuel, biorefining, bioproducts being talked about at national and international conferences as the model of the future.
Okay. Andrew, I think number 8's for you.
Right. Excuse me. So, yeah, our students, we're very happy to say, do get jobs. Not all of them get jobs in fuel production facilities just because that's one of the things that we've really learned from the community college model is that we really are geared to training local needs. And so on a local aspect, there's if we drew let's call it a 60-mile circle around Pittsburgh, there's a number of small-scale production facilities, a number of research facilities, and we do have a great relationship with employers. So when producers are hiring, we get telephone calls saying, hey, do you have any students that would be interested in coming to work for our facility? The issue, which I think I kind of touched on before, with really going, and not just for biofuels, but for any niche market, the problem that sometimes happens is that that market, if you don't hit it at the exact right time, they can be, you can flood the market with students. And so if we cranked out 24 graduates every year, we would have an incredibly hard time filling employing all of our students in biofuels production facilities. We're lucky to the point that we, well, I guess we're kind of lucky that we don't have that many graduates, and so we are able to really work and get our graduates jobs. But some other places that we have found jobs and when biofuels facilities aren't working or hiring, I'm sorry, is just actually about 2 weeks ago. I spoke with a gentleman at a brewing facility in North Carolina that somehow he and I started discussing basically the skills that our students are learning: basic distillation, basic chemical processing, moving bulk liquids around, pumps, pipes, all the stuff that if you walked in, it sounds kind of a lot like a brewery. And we actually got a student employed there. And so what we're trying to do is really find places that if fuel facilities aren't hiring right now, we work really hard to try and get our students opportunities at facilities that do very similar things that they can really leverage their skills. Now, we've also had students go off and work at just just a more of a mainstream industrial plant too. We've also had students that came to our biofuels program and then realized that they really enjoyed solar. So we actually have a couple of grads who went out and did solar and didn't really learn that skill here, but were turned on to it because of that multidisciplinary approach that we have. So we have a really good success rate. It's not quite as easy as calling up a company who says we need 45 employees and putting them in there. We have to work pretty hard at it, but we do find places for our students. Yeah.
Thanks. Number 9 is about public transportation vehicles.
So, go ahead, Norman.
Yeah, go ahead, Andrew.
Okay, so most public transportation vehicles, they purchase off of state contracts, and right now there are fuel providers, there are jobbers who obtain large amounts of fuel either from producers here in the state or other, and then sell that directly to especially state fleets. So there's contracts for state fleets, and they have certain requirements for renewable fuels. So that's where they purchase that. Norman, you want to expand on that?
All I was going to say is that the biodiesel industry is hurting. They can pretty much sell every gallon that they produce, and the limiting factor is feedstocks. There are no cheap feedstocks to be able to make biodiesel, and one of the requirements of the state contract is that producers have to be able to meet ASTM spec D6751, and it is not all of the producers are able to meet that spec, and this is understandable because the state fleet vehicles are out. These are the vehicles that are spraying when there's snow and when there are emergency weather conditions, and so that requirement makes perfect sense. For some of the really small scale biodiesel producers, it doesn't make sense for them to be able to meet all of that, the kind of logistics and paperwork and to be able to meet that spec, and so they may sell into a co-op, and so the fuel is still made available, but it just isn't necessarily available to state contract.
So I can speak to this, and it's actually, so what have we learned from private sector in biofuels, and specifically Pacific Biodiesel? And that's funny that one's actually mentioned because right now our lead instructor for biofuels, who was going to join me today but actually had to attend graduation for some of our students, came from Pacific Biodiesel in Hawaii. So Pacific Biodiesel was the first biodiesel producer in the United States. They have shown lots of great things, one of which I think is probably the one shining one is vertical integration of feedstocks. So Pacific Biodiesel, and the model that really, as far as small-scale fuel production goes, when I say small-scale, it's small-scale industrial, so relatively small compared to 100 million gallon a year plants, is feedstock procurement. And so Pacific Biodiesel has done a great job on waste oil collection, used cooking oil collection, because they've shown that, just like Norman just said, feedstocks, it's hard to find cheap feedstocks. And one good way to find cheap feedstocks is to procure them. And so if you'll look at who withstood these last couple of years when feedstock prices were high, fuel prices were low, across the country, one of the threads that ties them is a lot of them were companies that did procure their own feedstocks. So that is certainly one thing that I think that we've learned.
This is a funny question in the sense that the question of subsidies is once again not a straightforward question. When you look at the price at the pump for the petroleum fuels that are obtained in the United States, the question of boundaries needs to be addressed, because when you factor in the cost of the United States military protecting its logistical supply chain from the Middle East to the United States, the Fifth Fleet subsidy, as it were, which is based in Bahrain, and you start factoring in all of those kinds of numbers, you'll see that the price of petroleum is not cheap. The second issue here, when you start looking at subsidies, is that the petroleum industry is currently subsidized fairly heavily, even though they've been around 100 years. So the comment was made at the Sustainable Energy Conference last month that the issue of direct subsidies to the renewable industry as a whole is in most instances there as a way in which they can be competitive with the fossil fuel industry. In pretty much all of the work that the Biofuel Center is doing, we aim for cost competitiveness without subsidization. And the reason for that is because if an industry is dependent on subsidies, and subsidies are a function of politics, and the political winds change, then you end up killing an industry, or you can. And one of the difficulties in being able to raise the kinds of capital to be able to create a multi-billion-dollar biofuels industry sector is how, what is politics at a national scale? How is that going to impact biofuels? Currently, the largest subsidy for biofuels is what's called the VTEC credit, and the VTEC credit, or the blender credit, coming out of the Renewable Fuel Standard, goes to the petroleum industry to pay for infusers or the infrastructure to blend biofuels into petroleum. But fundamentally, there is no, the issue of subsidies is not a straightforward a question either way, and for the most part, because this is an industry that currently doesn't exist, the question of subsidies for biofuels is one that isn't necessarily easily addressed, and it also there are some incentives for planting of biomass, but they don't in any way equate for the kinds of billions of dollars that are being spent to secure petroleum and oil arriving in the United States.
So I can speak to this is the energy balance, and so this is going to depend on what crop you're talking about, what fuel process, what process they're going to be using to make it into fuel. But the bottom line is that this is for me and for I think for many in the biofuels industry, a negative energy balance, meaning that we're spending more energy procuring this fuel than we get out of this fuel is a non-starter. So the more appropriate, kind of back to that, what's the best crop, what's the best processing, I think if you take those two, how you get to that answer is what is the best energy balance. And so it's hard to really say. There's a myriad of answers to this because it is specific to the crop, but it is typically it is pretty good. So the one that anybody, the national average for biodiesel is about 3 units of energy out for every one you put in, because for the most part, the energy that we're putting into that is coming from the sun while those crops are just sitting there just in the sun, using that, relatively speaking, free energy instead of having to be an energy-intensive process. So it goes from negative to extremely positive all over the place. But Norman, if you want to add something to that.
Yeah, Andrew is absolutely spot on. The plants are essentially solar factories, and so the energy balance for fossil fuels are all positive. The energy balance for all biofuels, and this has been verified by studies by the Department of Energy, by NREL, by the Oregon National Labs. If you have a look at the research that's out there, and there's some on the Biofuels Wiki as well, even for first-generation biofuels, it's all better than that of fossil fuels. And when I say better, I mean that from a percentage point of view, significantly better. And when you start multiplying that by 140 billion gallons a year, that adds up pretty quickly. Depending on the type of crop that you're planting will determine the kinds of energy outputs. And the usual assessment here is what's called a life cycle assessment. And for the most part, the Renewable Fuel Standard calls for a life cycle assessment around greenhouse gases. And the projections around from pilot scale facilities around cellulosic ethanol are that the greenhouse gas emissions are minus 86% better than that of gasoline. And when you start looking at perennial grains, I'm assuming that what is meant over here is something like grain sorghum or sweet sorghum. There are some real opportunities around these insofar as both biomass sorghum and sweet sorghum produce sugars as well as a large amount of biomass. But the question is we're not yet sure whether or not it's better to plant something that gets harvested annually or has to get planted annually as opposed to something that gets planted once and is harvested for 12 years, like energy grasses are.
So yeah, I can talk to the energy density of cellulosic ethanol. The energy density of cellulosic ethanol will be the exact same as any other processing of ethanol, because what you're looking at is the energy density of that chemical. And so independent of what feedstock you obtain that ethanol from, that energy contained in that, if you want to call it a gallon or a pound or however you want to quantify that, is going to be the same regardless of feedstock. Now, there's going to be maybe some minute characteristics of the feedstock in there, but for generally speaking, plus or minus a certain percentage, you're going to have the same energy density, which is less than petroleum. In this case, gasoline would be the comparative, but it doesn't really matter what the feedstock is, I guess, as far as ethanol is going to be the same, which is about 90%, I believe, of petroleum gasoline. Yeah, and then this one here about food grade oil. So food grade is this is a complex issue, but the simple answer is it's a function of materials handling. So what makes oil food grade versus not? Well, one, it can be you can't water food grade crops with non-potable water. So, it can be as simple as that. So that's a non-starter. But once you get into the processing, really what you're looking at is materials handling. So as long as you adhere to practices that are USDA approved, and you have contact only with materials that are appropriate for any other food-grade material, such as stainless steel, and that your equipment is cleanable, sanitizable, all of that stuff that goes along with anything in the food industry. That's really what makes an oil potentially food-grade oil. So when I say that we're able to make food-grade oil, that means that we are able to use a press that has stainless steel screws that we're able to clean. We're able to actually put that through stainless steel piping into a stainless steel tote. All of the, it's just a materials handling. And then, is there a market for kind of small batch boutique oils? Sure. I mean, there is. It's not a huge market, but there are certainly there are markets for this type of oil. So, but what usually happens is if you're going to get a market for, let's say, a boutique oil, people don't really want to pay high dollar for an oil that they're going to fry in as much as they want to pay that high dollar for a wonderful tasting salad oil. And in the case of a salad oil, you don't get it back. So that's not really helping the biofuels industry as much as it is maybe finding a new market for a farmer's crop. So it's still a good thing, just not quite there. The closed loop, is there somebody out there, growing oil, sending it out to restaurants, recapturing it? There's folks who, I have heard a lot of folks talk about that model, but I can't point to one specific one that has been overly effective at doing that model. It's not to say that it doesn't work. It's just I don't know of anyone that I could point to and say this is for a fact has worked perfectly.
If I've managed to dig up some numbers, if I can go back to question 11, that around the cost of petroleum versus subsidies for biofuels. The VTEC credit, the volumetric ethanol excise tax credit, is 45 cents a gallon at the moment. That goes to blenders, which is essentially the petroleum industry. But the oil industry gets 6.5 billion gallons a year currently. It costs about $50 billion to protect Persian Gulf oil interests, and that's the what it costs that's the fifth fleet subsidy, as it were. And then the United States spends $266 billion a year, where that money simply leaves the United States to pay for oil. So those are pretty significant costs to the taxpayer. The VTEC credit costs relatively little, about $11 billion, and but what it has done is it has helped stimulate the industry sector to be able to ensure that a base is, or a foundation is laid for future growth in the sector.
Very good. Lots of good questions today. Thank you to our panelists. And as we wrap up, I'd like you to take just a moment to answer the brief survey that's on the right side of your screen. Your feedback will help us as we plan future BioForum events, and then just be sure to click Submit when you're finished. While you're doing that, please note that today's presentation was recorded, so you can view it again. You'll receive a thank you email from BioNetwork tomorrow, which will include a web link to the recording. And you can find out about other BioForum events by visiting our website, ncbionetwork.org. And please go ahead and make note of the June BioForum. Registration for this event is free and available online, again at ncbionetwork.org. I would like to thank our panelists for today. Thanks also to North Carolina BioNetwork for making this presentation possible. And thanks, of course, to you for your time and participation. This concludes our webinar, and on behalf of BioNetwork, thank you and have a great day.